What's up guys, this is Preheat, World First Raider in Complexity Limit and Wowhead Guide Writer, and today we're going to talk about Arcane Mage. So Shadowlands has been out for a little over a week and I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. If you've watched my stream, you've probably noticed I'm playing a lot of Arcane, and there's a couple good reasons for that. I think it's a really great spec, especially if you want to be out in the mall and you have to be running around. Just because of the speed that it has. Also, it's really great for slamming those mythic zeros and also leveling new characters in dungeons. But let's talk about some other things that make Arcane special. The best thing that happened to Arcane in Shadowlands is Mirror Image being baseline. Now, as a melee range cloth spec, Arcane, this is huge. For those of you who don't know, basically to use Arcane properly, you have to be in melee, you have to use Arcane Explosions, and in melee, threat's a little bit different. You actually get more threat in melee, and that's not great for a cloth wearer, since you take a lot of melee damage from enemies. Mirror Image basically acts as like a fake fade effect, so it essentially lets you be aggro free while you're in melee, and having this spell be baseline so you don't have to like talent into it or do anything special to get access to it is absolutely huge. I think that having this spell baseline is probably the biggest buff to Arcane in Dungeons this whole expansion. The damage reduction it provides is also just like a cherry on top, right? But yeah, a greater invisibility is another one of our great tools as an Arcane Mage, and it's especially useful in leveling, in just doing world content, world quests, doing stuff out in the mall. It's great. Basically, it's the same as invisibility, but it's instant cast, and it also gives us a damage reduction as well. So in terms of covenants, Night Fae is going to be the best covenant for Arcane Mages, generally speaking. Shifting power is fantastic for Arcane, just like it is for Fire. It offers cooldown reduction, and since Arcane Mages have multiple cooldowns, getting those all off cooldown quicker is really nice. Also, anytime you have a damage spell in combat as an Arcane Mage that doesn't spend mana is a good thing. So Night Fae for Fire Mages can use Soul Shape just the same as Arcane Mages. It's a movement speed increase with a built-in teleport that allows you to blink every couple seconds. It's an amazing tool, especially for traversing the maw, but you know, Mage already has a reasonable amount of mobility, so it's nothing all that special. I would just say that especially in the maw, it's very useful. Necrolord is also very good for Arcane, especially in 3 targets, since Deathborn allows you to cleave your Arcane Blast to 3 targets. But personally, I prefer Night Fae, just because, you know, it can be used for multiple specs, and also because I just generally like the gameplay of it. In terms of Soulbinds, you're going to want to use Dreamweaver for that early second potency slot if you can get to it. That's going to be Renown 13. But in the meantime, Naya is going to be our best one. In fact, it'll probably be our best one for raid. Corlin is also a very strong option as a backup. Another benefit of Night Fae is we have access to Discipline of the Grove, which is a fantastic trait for us. Basically, it gives us more CDR. And this is a trait that's basically the second best for AoE, the second best for single target. It's just a very versatile conduit, and having access to this conduit is fantastic. In terms of other covenants, Necrolord, as I mentioned before, is pretty strong, especially in 3 target cleave, because it allows you to cleave your Arcane Blast to 3 targets. But with 5 or more targets, Kyrian pulls slightly ahead. Keep in mind that Vintir is the worst covenant for Arcane Mages, but the difference between the best and the worst is only about 3%. Realistically, just play whatever the heck you want, right? It really doesn't matter all that much. In Mythic Plus, AoE is going to be king, so regardless of what the affixes call for, you just want more AoE damage. Obviously in AoE, you know, all the covenants are looking pretty good except for Vintir. But with Night Fae specifically, you get that cooldown reduction, you get that burst damage of shifting power. I think the overall Night Fae is just the best across the board. In terms of conduits, so in single target, Magni's Brand is going to be best, followed by Disciple of the Grove. For AoE, it's going to be Artifice of the Archmage, followed by Disciple of the Grove. So I think you can see kind of a trend there, right? So like if you only have one potency conduit, which is what most of us are only going to have access to for the next couple weeks, I definitely recommend that you just slot in Disciple of the Grove and call it a day. But yeah, it's in terms of the endurance and finesse conduits, I've already gone over those in 2 previous videos, the Frost video and the Fire video, so I'm not going to go into those again. Watch those videos if you want my thoughts on those. But mostly they're just healing and slight utility, so no big deal there. In terms of legendaries, so the Arcane Mage legendaries are actually pretty interesting. Of course, we have Temporal Warp, right, which I'm sure you all are aware of. This is the legendary from Legion Back Again, where we get our own personal lusts. We also have Siphon Storm, which is basically like Brainstorm from BFA. And we have a new one, Arcane Bombardment. This is also kind of a rehash of BFA, but it's very strong. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So for raiding, I recommend Temporal Warp. It's very strong, but there are some issues with it. So of course someone else needs to be the guy who provides Bloodlust to you, because you can't use Bloodlust on your own if you use this legendary, right? Like you want to keep it as your own cooldown. Additionally, you have to be able to choose when to lust, which means you probably need to have lust on the pull. And then another thing about it is you're probably going to want to be a Night Phase, since Night Phase cooldown reduction actually affects your time warp as well, which gives it even more value. If too many stipulations are getting on your nerves there, you can always go with Siphon Storm as well. Basically, what Siphon Storm does is whenever you evocate, you get an int buff, and then you can use that int buff to deal more damage. So basically, it's around the same damage as Temporal Warp, slightly below, but it makes us evocate before we go into our burn phase, which makes us do more damage. Arcane Bombardment is the Mythic Plus Legendary. It's my favorite. I want to talk about it here. So it basically buffs your Arcane Barrage by 130%, below 35% on the mob. So that's 130% increase to Arcane Barrage if the mob that it hits is below 35%. It's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So if you pair this with Resonance, right, the talent for mages, where it makes your barrage do increased damage per target it hits, I think it's 15% per target, you get really, really high numbers. So if you're ever in a situation in the Mythic Plus, and this happens all the time, where all of the targets, let's say you have 5 targets, right, and they're all below 35%, if you have this legendary and if you have Resonance and you let that Arcane Barrage rip, it hits so hard that basically your damage goes straight to the moon. It's absolutely insane. So honestly, this legendary is so sick that I just have to recommend it to everyone. And if I was going Arcane right now, if I knew which legendary I was going to pick and which spec I was going to play immediately, I would definitely do this without even a second thought. I would just immediately pick Bombardment. It's just way too cool. When it comes to talents, basically we have kind of 2 major setups here. So the first one is going to be basically our single target setup. And that's going to have amplification on the first row. That's going to be Clearcast gives us more arcane missiles whenever we fire those. Now for this one, on our 25 row, we can choose either Shimmer or Slipstream. It's kind of up to you here. So just pick whichever one you feel more comfortable with. We also have Master of Time, which is a new talent. It's pretty interesting. Basically reduces the cooldown on Alter Time. It's not especially good, but it's pretty good. On the next row, Rune of Power is going to be our go-to pick here. Just always choose Rune of Power if you're playing Arcane. And then on the 35 row, we have a decision to make. So in AoE, I would say pretty much always choose Resonance, right? But if you're ever in a single target scenario, like pure single target, then Arcane Echo is the way to go. Basically, this is the same as the old trinket from way back in HFC. I think it was called Prophecy of Doom, and basically, or Prophecy of Fear rather. And basically, whenever you deal damage to a target, it does like a mini explosion and does some damage around it. It's nothing all that special. I think generally speaking, if you have the Bombardment legendary, you probably just want to lock in Resonance and just have it on all the time. It does more in AoE, but it also deals slightly more in single target as well. So for the 40 row, this talent right here is the reason why I play Arcane whenever I'm just out about in the world, okay? This talent is absolutely amazing. Whenever you Arcane Barrage, it increases your movement speed by 50%, and it slows the enemy down. That's not too important, right? The slow is whatever. The speed that it gives you is the crazy part, all right? Because Arcane Barrage basically has no cooldown, which means you have this up 100% of the time. You're just always 50% faster, all right? Now, I'm sure you've done them all. If you're watching this video and you're max level mage, I'm sure you've done them all. Now, imagine if every second you spent in the mall was 50% faster. That's great, isn't it? Right? So this talent's just like a lock-in for me. I think that this talent alone is worth it just to go Arcane and do your dailies, do your Maw stuff, especially if you can't mount up. I mean, like, they didn't let us mount in the Maw for some reason. This is basically the hard counter to not being able to mount up, and I fully support it, and honestly, I think Arcane is probably the best Maw spec because of this talent. In terms of the next row here, Arcane Orb is very strong. I would say probably just go with Arcane Orb in most cases. Reverberance can be good in AoE as well, but I think that Arcane Orb is just way too powerful. It basically hits like a Mac truck. I mean, just look at that spell power coefficient on there, 109.2%. And it gives us arcane charges. And if you pair this once again with the legendary that we were talking about before, Bombardment, this basically gives us like a double tap on our Arcane Barrage, which is crazy. So, and then on the last row, Overpowered is going to be my talent of choice. Basically increases our damage, reduces our mana cost. This is just a fantastic talent, especially if you're getting power infusions during your burn, especially if you're getting lust during your burn. I think that you should just always run Overpowered, basically. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about the rotation. So now that we've talked about everything in, behind the scenes on Arcane, how do you play it? So Arcane is pretty simple to play. Basically, the general concepts are you have mana, which is your resource, and you also have arcane charges. Arcane charges go up to 4, and every time that you gain an arcane charge, it basically increases the mana cost of your spells, but it also amps them up, okay? Arcane rotations are commonly known as the burn and the conserve phase. Basically, in the burn, you want to spend your mana as quickly as possible and just get rid of it, dump it all as quickly as possible for massive, massive damage. And then once you're done with that, you basically get your mana back up, use all your cooldowns, and then you enter the conserve phase. So basically, in the conserve phase, you're mainly just trying to bide time until your cooldowns come back off cooldown. Mainly, arcane power and evocation are the two that matter most. In Shadowlands, we also have a new spell called Touch of the Magi. This is basically like a short cooldown burst spell that allows us to give like a mini burn in between arcane powers, which is pretty cool. So for single target, I recommend opening with Touch of the Magi and then just immediately popping all of your cooldowns and then just start blasting, right? Just Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast. Anytime your mana is below 95% and you have a clear casting proc, use that clear casting proc right away. We basically just want to keep burning until our arcane power is over. As soon as arcane power is over, we're going to want to cast a second rune of power, and we're going to want to keep blasting, right? This is super simple, right? It's basically like a one-button spec. So just pop all your cooldowns and start blasting. And then once you get to as close to 0% mana as possible, you're going to want to evocate back up all the way to full. And like I mentioned before, use your arcane missile procs as you get them. If you get those clear casting procs and you're below 95% mana, just use them right away. So since we go 0 to 100 so fast as Arcane Mages, I recommend that you use Mirror Image before you go into this burn, right? Because if you just go straight in, right, like Touch of the Magi, and so anyways, I started blasting, right, like you're gonna pull aggro pretty much immediately, okay? So show your tank some respect, at least give them a heads up, and if you aren't gonna do that, then use Mirror Image. It'll help out a lot. So as soon as arcane power fades, we're going to want to use Rune of Power. We're going to want to burn all the way down, like I mentioned before, evocate all the way back up, and then we enter Conserve. So the first thing we're going to do in Conserve is we're going to use Shifting Power, which is our Night Fae ability, to try and give us some CDR and basically get everything back off cooldown. We're going to use that after the burn phase is over, once Arcane Power is down, Evocation, Touch of the Magi, and Rune of Power. Once those are all on cooldown, then we can use Shifting Power. Also, keep in mind that in AoE, it does a lot of damage, so you might want to actually time it for doing really, really big damage if there's a lot of targets as well in dungeons and such like that. So, yeah, once we have everything on cooldown, we enter the Conserve phase. We just cast Arcane Blasts until we get 4 charges, and then we use Arcane Barrage to dump them. And the idea is basically you go 1, 2, 3, 4, dump. 1, 2, 3, 4, dump, right? So Arcane Blast until 4 charges, Arcane Barrage, rinse, repeat. If you have Arcane Orb, which you should, and you have 3 or fewer charges, you're going to want to use that on cooldown. Also, if you're going to cap out your mana, you're going to want to throw in maybe 1 or 2 extra Arcane Blasts in there, because any mana that you cap out and that you don't spend is basically just wasted mana, okay? So we don't want to do that. I recommend keeping your mana bar around 90% or so, because we want to have a good amount of mana for our miniature burn, which we'll talk about in just a bit. So if you have Rune of Power and Touch of the Magi off cooldown, basically what you want to do is cast Rune of Power into Touch of the Magi, and then you're going to want to just start Arcane Blasting until your Rune of Power is over with. Now, keep in mind, right, if you get if you get Clear Casting procs, you're going to want to use those right away, right? So anytime you get a Clear Casting proc, you use your Arcane Missiles. But if we're going to start running out of mana, make sure that you exit this burn right away. An Arcane Mage without mana is basically like a fish out of water. So if you're ever in a situation where you're going to be running out of mana because you've used too many Arcane Blasts, you want to definitely use your Arcane Barrage and try to recoup some of that mana, okay? Because we really, really need that mana, especially for our burns. Okay, so in AoE, basically the idea is we just spam Arcane Explosions and we dump with Arcane Barrage at 4 charges. That's it. It's really, really simple, right? Like Arcane AoE is probably about as simple as it gets. Arcane Orb basically hits like a Mack truck. So anytime that you have Arcane Orb up and there's a bunch of targets, what I recommend doing is, you know, if you've got 4 charges, use those with an Arcane Barrage right away. Use your Arcane Orb to get back to 4 charges, and then blast it again, right? And what's really cool about Arcane Orb is since it has like a trajectory that it goes, right, and it isn't necessarily all that fast, you can actually use it, Arcane Blast Arcane Barrage as soon as you get your 4th charge, right? And then you may even get charges back, so you may even be able to do 2 Arcane Barrages in a row. Sometimes it works out. But yeah, obviously it depends on your haste, and you may have to use a filler in between. But if you're using the Arcane Mage Legendary Bombardment, and your targets are sub 35% with this Legendary, basically you can Arcane Barrage them as soon as they hit sub 35%, right? Arcane Orb them, immediately get back up to 4 charges of your arcane charges there, and then Arcane Barrage them again, and it's like a Thanos snap. I mean, the mobs just literally they disappear. Okay, so yeah, just be aware that you can really use the Arcane Orb to your advantage to get those arcane charges back. And especially when mobs are entering execute, if you've got Bombardment, you're going to want to be looking for those mobs that are in execute range so that you can tap them off. So in situations where there might be 10 or more targets, sometimes it can be worth it to just spam Arcane Explosion, but obviously it's going to depend on a couple factors, right? And if you're using Bombardment, definitely make sure that you're always looking for those mobs that are going sub 35% so that you can get the most out of your execute there. Arcane AoE is very simple and effective, and if you're new to Mage, I definitely recommend that you try it out, especially in dungeons, maybe even while you're leveling up. You'll probably top damage, even if you only have Arcane Power, Arcane Explosion, Arcane Barrage, and Arcane Orb on your bar. Only those 4 moves, you'll probably still top damage on most packs just because you do so much damage. It's extremely noob friendly. I don't know how else to say it. It's a great spec, right? And keep in mind, if you're using Chrono Shift, you're also going to be extremely quick too. Right, so if you're ever in a situation where you're doing dungeons, like maybe Mythic Zeros, Heroics, Normals, maybe you're just leveling up, and mobs don't really have that much health, and you kind of kill packs really quickly, as an Arcane Mage, you can basically just annihilate the packs, right? Take all the pie, do all the damage, and everyone else there is going to be like, wow, what the heck? Arcane is kind of broken, isn't it? It's really great. So if you're ever in a situation where you aren't sure what to do, remember your ABCs. Always be casting. As a caster, if you are not casting spells, you're not doing damage, right? So you need to be casting your spells. So just always be casting. Even if it's the wrong spell, at least it's some damage that you're dealing. But remember, do not go out of mana, right? Arcane Mages, once again, if you run out of mana as Arcane and you don't have Evocation available to you, you're basically like a fish out of water. So make sure that you always have mana available to you. So yeah, Arcane is probably the easiest spec to pick up for new mages, and I definitely recommend it, but, you know, keep in mind, practice makes perfect, right? So definitely give it a shot, see if you like it. I really enjoy it, right? Especially for like world stuff, especially for the Maw. If you haven't tried it out, you really have to. I mean, it's a great spec. If you're interested in Fire or Frost, I recommend watching my other videos that I put out basically like the last month here. And also check out my 1-button combustion macro if you're having any trouble with fire. It's absolutely lolsy. Definitely go check that one out. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you like this guide, then please like and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so that you can see those notifications on my new videos, and then we'll see you in the next one.